All right, man. I think we're good. Another thing that's been weird is like lately when I've gone on like on my phone to watch this live with us, I can't tell how many people are on.
Huh.
Like
Well, I noticed that yesterday. We normally on Sundays stream from YouTube because it's just more accessible for people that way. But the internet's been messed up at our rental space for church. So we've had
okay.
to go on Facebook the last 2 weeks. And I noticed that too yesterday. I couldn't figure out how many people were on yesterday. I don't know what that is.
Oh, now I see it. I just brought it up again. It says there's 10, so I guess we can get going. Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're with us. Hi, Karen. Good to see you. We are going to be in Matthew chapter 10 for however many sessions it takes to go through. This shouldn't take as many. It's a shorter section, shorter sermon of Jesus here in Matthew. But today we were going to do a little bit of introduction, looking at how this fits in the context of the book of Matthew a little, and why this is such an important sermon that Jesus preached in the book. So I'll just go ahead and say, one of the things I really like about Matthew chapter 10 is I've sort of, in my own head, I've titled this chapter, "The Wonderful Counselor Counsels His Counselors." Like, what we're about to read right here is Jesus sending out kind of the first wave of disciples to be teachers and to be counselors and to be people who would influence others. This is our heritage. This is who we are as Christians, is people who've essentially been sent into whatever community we live in to tell people about the Lord, to be influential, all of the things that we're going to learn in this text. But we get this insight into how the greatest teacher who ever lived, as Isaiah called him, the wonderful counselor, how he talked about this mission, how he trained them and got their minds right and hearts right and told them what to expect. And though there are some things in this chapter that I think are very specific to the apostles, there's all kinds of principles that we learn some things from in our own lives. So that's one of the reasons I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I agree. And just to support that last thing you said, sometimes we can read about, oh, it's just the apostles, but there's almost identical instructions given in Luke chapter 10, where there is many more than apostles, depending on your translation, the 70 or the 72, which even still, that was a special group, but it shows these are pretty global principles that are supposed to apply. Maybe the particulars were a little different for them than for us, but we learn a lot of really great, valuable principles as we're trying to serve with Christ in the world. And I really like this stuff in chapters 8 and 9 that sets up. A lot of this happens, I think we mentioned this before, but in the sermons in Matthew, the stories in between the sermons kind of help us appreciate the meaning of the teaching sections, like the sermon here in chapter 10.
Yeah, very good. You want to comment a little bit on that? I was going to say some stuff about the end of chapter 9, but since you brought up chapter 8, anything in particular about those stories that jump out at you?
I mean, to me, when I read chapters 8 and 9, there's at least three things that stand out. One is the variety of people that Jesus interacts with. There's people of different nations, different ages, different sorts of problems, different sorts of attitudes, and he's interacting with all these different people. Well, that's a little bit of what he's going to end up addressing in chapter 10, is interacting with different types of people and interacting even in kind of different ways depending on the person. There's a big emphasis on faith all throughout chapters 8 and 9. There's several stories where Jesus, like the disciples are afraid on the boat, and he challenges them, where is your faith? Why is your faith so small? He praises people for their faith. He says of the centurion, I've never found such faith, even in all of Israel. Well, if we're going to do this stuff in chapter 10 that Jesus is calling his disciples to do, it's going to take a lot of faith. And a lot of the things in chapter 10 are specific exhortations to faith. Hey, I want you to go work, but it's not relying on yourself. It's relying on me. So the different types of people is big that Jesus interacts with as a model, the exhortations to faith. The other thing that's interesting to me, I think it was the last time I was studying these chapters, I noticed how often Jesus' commandment is go.
Yeah.
All throughout chapters 8 and 9. Almost every story, he'll say, like, go and learn what this means, or once with a demon possessed man, literally the only word Jesus says in the whole story to the demons is go.
Yeah.
There's other examples of him telling, or follow me, that kind of stuff. Well, in chapter 10, it's all about going. Jesus is sending people out. So I like those stories, because I think when I read chapter 10, the instructions, once I think about it, I'm like, man, that's kind of hard. If I need some encouragement or some motivation or kind of an example of what it looks like, I can read those stories in chapters 8 and 9. It helps quite a bit.
Very good. Very good. So I like all that. So let me focus. So let's go ahead and get into the text. I'm going to focus at the end of chapter 9 here and kind of get us into chapter 10. Jesus did some pretty extraordinary miracles in this chapter, from the paralytic, there to the woman who was bleeding in verse 20, and she touched his cloak. And then, the little girl who, they thought had died, and he raises her and all of that. Um, let's go ahead and look here, though, at verse 32, Matthew chapter 9, verse 32. As they were going out, a mute, demon-possessed man was brought to him. After the demon was cast out, the mute man spoke, and the crowds were amazed and were saying, "Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel." But the Pharisees were saying, "He casts out the demons by the ruler of the demons." Jesus was going through all their cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. Seeing the people, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dispirited like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore, beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest." Chapter 10. Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. Now, the names of the 12 apostles are these: the first, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, and James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed him. All right.
We were kind of chatting about this before. There's a real similarity you pointed out in the statement made. Never has anything like this been seen in Israel. It's the same kind of stuff that they were seeing beforehand, and certainly that they heard afterward. We've never heard anybody talk like this before. At the end of chapter 7, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, everything Jesus did and said was completely and radically unique. I think that's such a great setup for chapter 10, where he's going to send the disciples out to preach the good news of the kingdom. It's kind of a natural, almost, we have these things that hold us back. But if we really get captivated with the greatness of Jesus, it's a pretty natural thing to talk about him. Yeah. Like anything that we get captivated by, a new piece of technology or a book we're reading or a movie we've seen or just some gift someone gave us or a new relationship. Whenever you get really excited and captivated by something, it just compels you to go out and speak about it. And that's how it ended up being for the people around Jesus. I mean, in chapter 9, just before this, in verse 31, they went away and spread his fame throughout all the district just because they saw him. This was incredible. Right. Verse 26, the report of this went throughout all that district. Even when Jesus would tell people, "Hey, don't make a big deal out of this. Don't tell people about this," they would violate his will and go do it. And almost, they just couldn't help it almost, And
then when he tells us to share it, we're hesitant, right?
Right.
So maybe he needed to command us to keep our mouths shut, and then we would have been disobedient, right? No, that's exactly right, because verse 30 says, "See that no one knows about this." In the very next verse, they go ahead and talk about it anyway. Yeah. The other part of this, so what we're going to see in chapter 10 is Jesus is going to give these guys authority to do similar miracles. And so they're going to go out and have that authority. But there's also, I think, going to be, they're going to gain some attention. And just like you were saying, Jesus gained attention. People were amazed. People wanted to talk about him. But that cut two ways. There were the people that were excited about it and wanted to say, like, this is great and this is amazing. Just like I'm sure for the apostles, there were people that would receive them that way. But there was another kind of person who, even because they were captured by what was happening, had to come up with some counter narrative, had to say something different about what was happening here. So in verse 34, the Pharisees start saying, well, he's casting out demons by the ruler of demons. We need to listen for that in chapter 10, because Jesus is going to say, hey, if they talk about me like this, they're going to talk about you like this. Like, you're going to have the same experience. Maybe just by way of application, I think every Christian knows this. When you begin to live your life boldly for God, like if you in your workplace or in your neighborhood or in your family start really very clearly and confidently saying, I'm a Christian, this is who I am, I live the life God wants me to live, I try to encourage and tell others that they need to get right with God, there'll be some people that will notice that for the good, and you'll be influential. But don't be surprised when there's people that don't like that happening and begin to come at you and try to make you not do that anymore. That's the whole nature of it. And I think that's going to be a major theme in this chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've been trying to think about positive spins on things this year, you know. And one thing that I've thought about a lot is people who've been so like almost vicious with their social and political views, whatever they may be, whichever direction. I'm like, all right, what can I take from these people, you know? And the one thing is like they so believe in what they believe in, and they're so just rabid about it almost.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, some cases it's just bad motives, but I think in some cases people believe these things because they really think it's going to make a difference in people's lives, and so they don't care if people are mad at them or if they say bad things about them or they don't want to be their friend anymore, because I think what I'm standing up for is going to make a difference in the world and in the lives of other people. And I think besides just believing in Jesus himself and in his message, I've got to come to believe that proclaiming this message is really going to make a difference in the lives of people. That A, people actually have a need that Jesus meets,
Mhm.
and B, that Jesus is the only one who will meet the needs that people have.
Yeah.
And therefore, if whatever rejection, whatever mistreatment, whatever mocking, whatever hardship may come with being somebody who proclaims the good news of Jesus and his kingdom, I'm going to endure that because I really believe in this message that I have, that it's what people need and it's the only thing that'll make a difference in their life. And that's kind of where Jesus goes at the end of this chapter. I think when he looks out on the crowd, he's trying to help his disciples see, you got to see with my eyes, and
Right.
then you'll speak my message.
Yeah, very good. Actually, I wanted to comment on that phrase in verse 36, 9:36, when it says seeing the people.
Yeah.
Think of all the other things that Jesus could have seen besides the people he was trying to reach. I mean, he could have seen his fame. Like, everybody's hearing me, like everybody knows who I am. How many people do you know that, like, as they become more and more well known, that's kind of what they see, like, oh man, everybody's paying attention to me, and they kind of get in their own head about it. He could have seen his critics in verse 34 and sort of been overwhelmed by the fact that he had critics that were calling him the devil and all kinds of other things. He could have even seen the ministry itself in verse 35. He's doing all this stuff. Look how busy I am. Look how busy I am. But Jesus sort of cuts through all that, and it says he was looking at the people, like he
Yeah.
saw the people. This is what this is about. But then it also talks about what he felt when he
Right.
saw them. You know, verse 36, when it says people, there's a footnote in my Bible that says it's crowds. And I think some versions may even translate it like multitudes. He saw the multitudes. I just I want to get Christians to think about this for a minute. When was the last time you were in a multitude of people or a crowd of people? I know it's probably been a while because this year there's not a lot of that. But do you remember when you would go to, a baseball game or state fair here in Minnesota, or you're in New York and you're going down the crowded streets?
Or a shopping mall in December most
Yeah,
years.
or shopping mall. Yeah, the Mall of America is here in Minnesota. So, but just remember, like when you're around a crowd of people, let me tell you historically what's happened to me in a crowd. I hear people swearing, cussing. Somebody at a ball game starts getting in a fight because they're drunk. Somebody over here is like immodest and wearing clothes that I don't want to see, and I don't want my kids to see. And I start sort of feeling anxious and upset about all the bad things around me in a crowded world. And honestly, if I'm being honest, this is how the verse would read if it was about me. Seeing the crowds, Andy felt compassion for himself because he was distressed and dispirited over their bad behavior. Like, I got to be honest, like that's how I have looked at things for a long time. Like, man, us Christians, we're the victim here in this dark world. Like, we're the ones who are distressed and upset because of all the sin out there. And I just want to point out that that's not how Jesus thought. Jesus would see them and feel compassion, not for himself because the work was so great, or look at all the negative influences, but I feel compassion for them because, and this is really interesting in the verse 36, they were distressed and dispirited. What does that mean? Distressed literally means harassed, like they were harassed. Well, they were sinners. Who were they harassed by? Weren't they the harassers? I think part of the implication is no, there's a devil out there who's deceived them. And the fact of the matter is, they're like sheep without a shepherd. Some of their leaders, people who should have been leaders, weren't making them any better. They were stirring up hearts of division and hatred. And I mean, look at what we have for leadership these days. Um, are we being called to better behavior and better attitudes generally, or is it typically like people are getting distressed and dispirited by the things that are going on? And that's what Jesus saw. They were victims of a deception. But again, I don't always think about it like that. Sorry, I've talked for a while. You go.
No, I love that. And actually, so I think verse 36 highlights this problem that I think we all can be honest about and say, I don't see people with that kind of compassion, at least not always. Sometimes in our better moments where we're really following after Jesus' heart, we are. And that's what holds us back sometimes from serving, from pointing people to Christ, from being a friend to people so that we can point them to Christ. But I think another challenge is sometimes, at least I can say this one for me, besides is there can be just a sense of despair. Like when I do feel compassion and like I look around here on the train and I see a bunch of people that look down or are mad or don't want to talk to somebody or are just talking crazy talk or whatever, you can just get a feeling like, man, I don't know what can be done.
Right.
I don't know what can be done. But it's amazing to me that Jesus saw people with that compassion you're talking about in verse 36, but also in verses 37 and 38, it's not a despair on his part, like, oh man, look how helpless everybody is. And it's just what a lost cause this world is. I mean, in a sense, it was that, but he saw, like, hey guys, look around you. The harvest is plentiful. There is so much opportunity here to make something happen, to do some good. And you know, you need to be praying that God would send out more workers because there's not enough workers out there. There's more work than workers to be done. There's more work to be done than workers there are to do it. And by the way, if you're praying for that, that means you better be about it too. You better get out there. And I love that mentality that Jesus reminds us of here. And I need to be reminded of it probably every single day, to not get down with all the bad stuff we see in people's lives or to feel like, wow, it's just kind of a lost cause, but actually to believe like, no, this good news of Jesus Christ and the power of God working through Christ and his spirit, it will change lives. It will bring people home. It will save people and give them life again. We just got to believe it and go out and do the work and let God do his thing, believing that he actually will. So I think that's the great thing about this setup to chapter 10 is he addresses our need for greater compassion. And he also addresses our temptation to despair and to say, oh, it's a lost cause.
Yeah, very good. I think this whole section where verses 36 through 38, where Jesus tells us, where both Matthew and Jesus tell us how Jesus saw things, this is a huge shift that has to take place in our life. Sylvia just was kind and says she has a new viewpoint, and I think what she's saying is, how often do we feel despair for ourselves because of the darkness? But the thing we get upside down also is what you mentioned in verse 37. I mean, how many times have you heard preachers or even yourself said out loud, man, the problem is nobody wants to hear the gospel anymore. There's nobody out there that cares about spiritual things. Now, listen to ourselves when we talk like that. That's the exact opposite of what Jesus said in verse 37. I mean, what Jesus says is the real problem is that there aren't enough workers. We Christians are fooling ourselves if we think the problem in our neighborhoods or in our communities is there's just not enough people out there that want to hear it. That's not the problem.
Yeah.
The problem is a bunch of us who sit on the pews, myself included, just aren't working. We're not out thinking about the harvest. We don't see the world that way, so we don't talk that way.
Mhm.
I'll tell you one of my prayers about all this stuff that's happening this year with COVID and everything else. I'm truly hoping that on the other side of this, maybe even now, but it's a little bit hard when we've not been able to interact with people. I'm hoping that it will give us Christians some opportunity to say, like, hey, do you guys know how fragile life is?
Yeah.
Like, do you see how things can change so quickly? Um, I have to believe there's going to be people on the other side of this looking for something hopeful, something real, disappointed in physical worldly leadership and peace, and that maybe we can use that, because I really do believe that the fields are white. I do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And Jesus' punchline is, all right, something needs to be done about it. And it's interesting to me that Jesus also lets the disciples know kind of early on, at least in Matthew's record, I'm not going to be the only one doing it. Like, I am doing it. You guys know, y'all been watching me,
Mhm.
but there needs to be more. Like, I came not only just to do the work, but to train you guys and to train others to go out and do this work. And that's a really amazing thing. We've been trying to read the Chronicles of Narnia books with the kids. We just started that this last week or so, and I'd forgotten about this part. It'd been a long time since I read it, but there's this chapter where Aslan, the lion, it's like the Jesus figure or whatever. He brings all these animals to life that got turned into stone, and he turns this lion into life. And the lion runs around telling people. He says, do you hear what he said? He said, "Us lions, me and him and me." And the lion's just so excited that Aslan would count him to be like his partner in this work.
Mhm.
And I just like that kind of got me emotional thinking about that. That's exactly how it should be for us. That Christ is saying, hey, I expect you guys to get on board with the work I'm doing. And you have the opportunity to do the same work that I'm doing. So let's go. Let's go do this thing. And that's a really motivating, exciting thing that Jesus would call us into this, would call his followers, not just to trail behind him, but to get up beside him and do this work.
Yeah, very good. This gets us to chapter 10. If Jesus says in verse 38, hey, there's a harvest and we want God to bring workers into the harvest. Well, what if I'm somebody who says, well, that's not me. I can't do that. Like, that's not really my place. Like, I'm not qualified. I think it's important that verses 1 through 4 are here for us. Look at who Jesus chose to do this. And let's make some observations about what it was that made them qualified to do it. These were not educated people. These guys hadn't gone to seminary. They hadn't sat at the feet of all the rabbis. You know, um, these were simple people from all kinds of different walks of life. Um, I mean, the reason that it's so significant is how different so many of them were, actually.
Yeah.
And you know that their approaches in whatever cities they would go to in chapter 10 were going to be different. They were going to sound different. You know, God's got a place for everybody, no matter where you're from or what your situation is. You got thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, in every aspect. Employment, you have a guy who's working for the state as a tax collector, and you got guys who are, you know, day labor fishermen guys.
Hmm.
Temperament, you've got guys who, whenever Jesus would get rejected in some places, they'd say, "Hey, Jesus, is now the time we call down fire from the sky and burn this place to the ground?"
Right.
And then you got other guys who, whenever Jesus would face opposition, and Thomas, his response would be, "Well, let's go die with him." I mean, I admire the courage from Thomas, but also super downer. I mean, we
Yeah.
just know Thomas was the guy who was
Right.
so temperament very different.
Right.
You know, you had people like Philip and Andrew who seemed like more sort of quiet servant type guys, you know, pulling aside people, taking care of business. Then you got Peter, who's kind of the, if I can be a little disrespectful, loudmouth, you know.
Mm.
Um, you got people with different, at least you would think, somewhat different political perspectives. Back to Matthew, he's working for the Romans,
Mhm.
and you got a zealot
Right.
who their whole
Terrorists.
thing, they're like a terrorist group against the Romans. I mean, it's almost like Jesus super duper on purpose, like, all right, let me get all the opposites,
Right.
just all the opposites I can think of in employment and social standing and temperament and education and social everything. I'm just going to get all opposites to show people that everybody is a part of this work, no matter what's going on with you. If you're following Jesus, you're part of this work, no matter what your background is or what your personality is. And B, we gotta we have to, and actually we're greatly aided by working together with those that are different from us. It's not just let's find a bunch of people that are exactly like us. Let's all work together. It's good. It's I mean, as long as they're following Jesus, we're not just trying to be diverse for diversity's sake. But if someone's following Jesus, then it's good for me to be partnered with somebody who's pretty different from me.
Yeah. And you also have to think about, did these guys hold on to their pasts too? You know what I mean? Like maybe they always had some sort of bent towards those things. Maybe Simon the Zealot always was going to stay like a, a pro Israel, anti-Roman. Maybe he was. But I have to imagine that as these men did their work and thought about the souls of men and began to move towards being more like Jesus, those things became less and less important to them, and the things that divided them disappeared. That has to happen in our churches too. Like that has to. So those are great thoughts about all of that.
And just on that point you're making, um, I think this actually gives us great insight into what's happening whenever we do the work of the gospel.
Mhm.
For sure, us preaching the gospel and telling people about Jesus is going to impact other people because as we preach the gospel, they're going to hear about Jesus, they're going to believe, they're going to be saved, they're going to be changed. But I just have to believe that God, if that was God's only goal, he could have used a lot better messengers to convince people to get the
Right.
message out there.
Right.
So I have to believe, and I think actually this chapter later on, some things that Jesus is going to say specifically are going to indicate this, that a big part of God's work in our preaching of the gospel is that we would become more like Jesus. That's just as much of the point as it is just about getting the message out there to everybody. It's that the message would get deeper inside of us. Like in Acts chapter 4, whenever Peter and John are standing before the Sanhedrin, it says that the people saw that they were uneducated and untrained men,
Right.
but they also saw that they had been with Jesus. Like something about them had changed, and they weren't looking like fishermen and tax collectors and zealots and
Right.
pessimists and angry men and all that anymore. They were being changed because they were doing this work. And that goes to your point that we start dropping that other stuff because the more we do the work that Jesus has called us to do, the more we become like the wonderful counselor himself.
Very good. I'll maybe for the last couple minutes, I just want to draw everybody's attention to verse 1 of chapter 10. There are two things that it says about what he did with these guys. Number one, he summoned them, like he summoned them, and two, he gave them authority. Now, obviously, this is miraculous authority, and they were able to do things. But there's a sense in which when if we're going to be people who affect our world, we have to have these two things in our mind. Number one, there is a summoning or a calling that this is what we're supposed to be in the world. And number two, there's got to be at least some amount of authority that what I'm offering other people with the gospel is something that's affected my life. That God really has changed my heart, my attitude. I do actually have peace that passes understanding if I'm trying to offer other people peace. And that doesn't mean perfectly in every way. Those are things we wrestle with. But still, the idea would be that, like you said, the gospel's got to get in us and change us. And that's what's going to make it compelling when we share it, is that there is some authority we have to say, hey, God can help, God can save, God can change. And look what he's done with me, you know.
And if anybody wonders, like, should we really claim some measure of authority? Like you said, it's not apostolic authority. It's not the same exact kinds of authority as this, but First Peter chapter 2, verses 9 and 10 says that we're a royal kings and queens priesthood. Those are authority statements.
Right.
The way we exercise our authority is through service, through speaking truth, through subjecting ourselves to Christ and even to our fellow man. But we need to walk around with that kind of sense of responsibility, not of entitlement, but of responsibility that Jesus has given me power in this world, power over sin, power of the truth of the gospel. And I need to be exercising that power, exercising that authority. That's what he called me for, not just to sit back and wait for him to come back and take me home, although we are looking forward to that. But while we're here, we're supposed to work as his kings and queens in the world to do something good.
Very good. Very good. All right, we're out of time. We'll pick up here Wednesday. You good with
Have
Wednesday?
fun. Yeah. Thanks
And
everybody for the really encouraging comments and good stuff as always.
yeah, one of the things I liked about the comments today is people are thinking about how are we looking at the world? What can we do better? So that's the call for today. Like let's look at people today the way Jesus did and think about our place in the world as being workers. So thanks everybody for being a part of it. And we'll get into the sermon on Wednesday,
See
Lord
y'all
willing.
later.